The HR smiled as she slid the envelope across the table. I hope you understand this isn't personal. 7 days later, the same company would lose nearly $12 million. Production would grind to a complete stop. Our biggest customer would cancel a contract worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. The board of directors would spend an entire night trying to answer one simple question. How did firing one engineer bring an entire chemical plant to its knees? Sitting in that conference room, none of them knew the answer. Neither did I. Not yet. I've learned something after 32 years in manufacturing. Whenever someone tells you it isn't personal, it's almost always personal. I looked down at the white envelope resting on the polished conference table. Daniel Carter. My name was printed neatly across the front. No surprise, no anger, just confirmation. For weeks, I'd felt this moment coming. Nobody had warned me. They didn't have to. Companies have a strange way of saying goodbye long before HR schedules the meeting. People stop asking for your opinion. They stop inviting you to planning meetings. Conversations suddenly end when you walk into the room. You slowly become invisible. Long before your employee badge stops working. I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. Instead, I looked through the conference room window toward the refinery. Steam drifted into the Texas morning sky. 3 processing units stretched across nearly 200 acres of steel pipes and towers. 1 reactor was shut down for scheduled maintenance. Exactly where it was supposed to be. At least, I hoped it was. Because if reactor 3 wasn't restarted correctly, the rest of the plant would eventually follow it. Only 3 people in the company fully understood why. By the end of the week, only one of them would still be employed. The HR manager cleared her throat. Daniel, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate your position as part of our organizational restructuring. There it was. Not poor performance, not misconduct, not retirement, just one polished corporate word. Redundancy. I nodded once. I figured. She looked relieved. As part of the restructuring, we've partnered with an outside consulting firm to improve operational efficiency. Of course they had. For nearly a month, the consultants had been walking through the refinery in spotless blue suits hidden beneath brand new safety gear. Their hard hats still looked fresh out of the box. Their white safety glasses somehow never collected dust. They carried tablets instead of clipboards. Asked dozens of questions, rarely waited long enough to hear the answers. One of them had shadowed me through Reactor 3 the previous week. He watched me stand beside a compressor for nearly 40 minutes without saying a word. Finally, he couldn't hold his curiosity any longer. Can I ask you something? Sure. What exactly are you doing? Listening. He frowned. Listening to what? I rested my hand against the steel housing. The machine vibrated gently beneath my palm. It's running smoother than yesterday. He blinked. You can tell that? I smiled. The pressure gauge tells me what the machine is doing. I tapped the warm steel with 2 fingers. This tells me how it's feeling. He stared at me for another second before typing something into his tablet. Whatever he wrote, it wasn't the most important lesson he should have learned that day, because 7 days later, the company would discover something no spreadsheet had ever measured. Experience isn't expensive. Replacing it is. The HR manager slid another document toward me. This outlines your severance package. I glanced at the number. It was generous. 24 weeks of salary, unused vacation, healthcare extension, career placement services. The company wanted me gone, but politely. I appreciate it, I said. She looked genuinely surprised. I expected this conversation to be more difficult. I smiled. It'll be difficult next week. She frowned. What do you mean? Nothing. I folded the papers and placed them back inside the envelope. As I stood to leave, the conference room door opened. In walked Mark Ellison, Chief Financial Officer, 43, Harvard MBA, perfect haircut, perfect suit, perfect confidence. He stopped when he saw me. Oh, I didn't realize you were finishing. The HR manager stood. We're all set. Mark smiled politely. Daniel? I nodded. Mark? He looked at the envelope in my hand. I hope you understand this decision wasn't easy. I almost laughed. It probably hadn't been, not because of me, because replacing experience with spreadsheets always looks easier on paper. He stepped closer. I want you to know this wasn't about your contribution. No? No. It's simply a matter of efficiency. There was that word again. Efficiency. Consultants love that word. So do executives who've never had to restart a processing unit at 2 in the morning. Mark continued, "You've been an outstanding employee." But he hesitated. "The company has to adapt." I waited. "Our analysis showed your position had become." He searched for the right corporate phrase. "Financially unsustainable." There it was, the real reason. Not redundancy. Money. I wasn't just another engineer. Money. I wasn't just another engineer. I was the highest paid technical employee in the entire company. My annual salary was just over $310,000. People heard that number and assumed I'd won the lottery. They never saw the other side. 32 years, thousands of emergency callouts, Christmas mornings spent repairing failed equipment, anniversaries missed, birthdays interrupted, middle of the night phone calls, countless weekends sleeping on a folding cot inside the control building because the plant couldn't safely operate without me nearby. Nobody remembered those nights. They only remembered the salary. Mark folded his arms. "The consultants believe 4 younger engineers can replace 1 senior engineer." I nodded. "They probably do." "You disagree?" "I didn't say that." He smiled. "So you think they're right?" I looked him in the eye. "I think they're about to find out." For the first time, his smile disappeared. An hour later, I was cleaning out my office. It didn't take long. After 3 decades, I still kept surprisingly little. Family photo, coffee mug, a flashlight, a stack of worn engineering notebooks, 1 framed certificate from 20 years ago, and an old hard hat covered with faded inspection stickers. Jake from maintenance leaned against the doorway. "They actually did it? Looks that way." He shook his head. "This place won't be the same. It'll still be here." "I'm not talking about the buildings." Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he asked, "What are they thinking?" I smiled. "They're thinking exactly what I would have thought 30 years ago." He frowned. "Meaning?" "They think knowledge lives in documents." I closed the last box. "It doesn't. It lives in people." By lunchtime, nearly everyone in the plant knew. Word spreads fast in manufacturing, faster than any company email. As I walked toward the parking lot, operators waved. Electricians stopped to shake my hand. Mechanics came out of workshops just to say goodbye. One young engineer caught up with me. Her name was Emily. She'd been with the company less than 2 years. "I heard what happened." "I'll be okay." She looked upset. "I wasn't worried about you." That surprised me. "I'm worried about us." I smiled. "You'll figure it out." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happens if reactor 3 starts oscillating again?" I stared at her. "Who told you about that?" "No one. I saw something in an old maintenance log." I laughed quietly. "So you actually read those?" She smiled nervously. "I try. I respected that. Most people never open the old logs. They'll be fine." "You sure?" I looked back toward the refinery, toward the tallest processing tower, toward reactor 3. "I hope someone remembers what I told them." As I reached my truck, someone called my name. It was Mark. He jogged across the parking lot holding a folder. "Daniel." I almost forgot. He handed me one final document. Company property checklist. I signed it. Badge, laptop, keys, access card, everything returned. He tucked the papers into his folder. Then he smiled. "You know, I really believe this company is entering a new era." I nodded. "I believe you. We're finally eliminating unnecessary dependence on individuals." I looked at him for a long second. Then I said something that, at the time, sounded almost meaningless. "I hope you backed up the reactor 3 configuration." He frowned. "What configuration?" "The one that keeps the pressure stabilization sequence from fighting itself." Blank stare. "I don't know what that is." "I know." I climbed into my old pickup, rolled down the window. "It's probably nothing." Then I drove away, watching the refinery shrink in my rearview mirror. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't responsible for what happened inside those gates. 7 days later, at exactly 6:17 on a Monday morning, my phone rang. On a Monday morning, my phone rang. My phone rang exactly 6:17 Monday morning. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Emily Brooks, junior process engineer. I had trained her less than a year earlier. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Morning, Emily." She didn't even say hello. "Daniel, are you busy?" I looked out my kitchen window, coffee in one hand, garden hose in the other. For the first Monday in 32 years, I had nowhere to be. "Not particularly." There was a long pause. Then she lowered her voice. "I probably shouldn't be calling." "No, You probably shouldn't. I know. Another pause, but something's wrong. I didn't ask what. Instead, I asked a different question. Is anyone hurt? No. Good. Is the plant still standing? Yes. Good. I took another sip of coffee. Then what's happening? Emily sighed. Reactor 3 keeps shutting itself down. I closed my eyes. There it was, the words I'd been expecting. Not hoping for, expecting. What happened? We restarted after the maintenance outage. Everything looked normal for about 20 minutes. And then the pressure started oscillating. I looked at the sky. Gray clouds were gathering over my neighborhood. What kind of oscillation? It climbs, then drops, then climbs higher, then drops again. Faster each cycle. I nodded to myself, and eventually the emergency protection system trips. Silence. How did you know? Because I'd seen it before. Twice. Once in 2014, again in 2019. Neither incident had ever made it into the official reports. Not because anyone was hiding them, because we'd solved the problem before production stopped. Experience has a funny habit. It teaches lessons that spreadsheets never record. Have you checked the stabilization loop? We did. Everything looks normal? I know. Another silence. Then she asked quietly, "Can you tell us what we're missing?" I looked at the coffee in my hand. "I'm sorry, Emily. I can't." She sounded hurt. "Why not?" "Because I don't work there anymore." She didn't answer. I knew she understood. If I started giving instructions over the phone, who carried the responsibility if something went wrong? Me? The company that had already terminated my employment? Neither answer was good. Finally, she whispered, "I figured you'd say that. I wish I didn't have to." Before hanging up, I said one last thing. Trust the operators. What? They've lived with those machines longer than the consultants have. Then I ended the call. By lunchtime, I had almost convinced myself the problem had been solved. Then the television interrupted a baseball game. Breaking news. A helicopter hovered above an industrial complex. I recognized it immediately. Redwood Specialty Chemicals, my former employer. The reporter spoke quickly. Operations remain temporarily suspended following what the company is describing as a precautionary shutdown. No fire, no explosion, no injuries, just no production. Most viewers changed the channel. People who didn't work in manufacturing heard those words and thought, no big deal. People like me knew better. Every hour that refinery wasn't producing, hundreds of thousands of dollars disappeared. Around 3 that afternoon, Jake called. "You watching the news?" I saw it. Not because anything was funny, because he couldn't believe it. They've got 32 people in the control room. And no one agrees what's wrong. I wasn't surprised. Consultants, they're here. Corporate, 3 vice presidents. The software vendor, they flew someone in from Houston. I smiled. They're moving quickly. Jake sighed. Too quickly. What actually happened? They thought it was a sensor. So they replaced it. Didn't help. Then they blamed the control software. They rebooted everything, still shutting down. He lowered his voice. Now they're talking about replacing the pressure controller. I nearly dropped my coffee. Please tell me they haven't. They're about to. I looked toward the television again. They're chasing symptoms. What do you mean? I mean, if the controller is doing exactly what it's programmed to do, then replacing it won't change anything. Jake was quiet. So what is it? I don't know. Not anymore. I no longer had access to the live data. Without data, guessing is dangerous. That evening, the company's stock dropped almost 6%. News websites blamed supply chain problems. Financial analysts blamed aging equipment. Industry experts blamed deferred maintenance. Everyone had an opinion. Very few had evidence. I turned the television off. Tuesday morning, Emily called again. This time, she sounded exhausted. "I've been awake for 26 hours. You should go home." "I can't." "Why?" "They've shut down Unit 2 now." I sat up straighter. "What?" "They're afraid the instability could spread." That wasn't good. Not good at all. Unit 2 and Reactor 3 shared utilities. Shutting one down to protect the other made sense, but it also meant production had fallen to almost zero, Emily continued. The consultants, someone changed the control logic. "I've been awake for 26 hours. You should go home." "I can't." "Why?" "They've shut down Unit 2 now." I sat up straighter. "What?" "They're afraid the instability could spread." That wasn't good. Not good at all. Unit 2 and Reactor 3 shared utilities. Shutting one down to protect the other made sense, but it also meant production had fallen to almost zero, Emily continued. The consultants, someone changed the control logic. I frowned. Did anyone? Not that we can find. What about the backup? Silence. A long one. Finally, there isn't one. I stopped breathing for a second. What? The backup server failed during the maintenance shutdown. And we assumed the secondary image was current. It wasn't. How old? Almost. She swallowed. 6 years. I leaned back in my chair. Now things finally made sense. During those 6 years, I'd made dozens of small adjustments. Not because I wanted to, because every major turnaround teaches you something new. A valve that responded slower in winter, a pressure spike during humid weather, a sensor that drifted after 8 months instead of 12. Tiny changes, individually meaningless. Together, they kept the plant stable. Every adjustment had been documented. Every recommendation had been emailed. Every revision had been submitted. Whether anyone had archived them properly, I had no idea. Late Tuesday afternoon. Jake called again. You sitting down? I am now. The consultants just admitted they don't understand the sequence. I closed my eyes. What sequence? The stabilization algorithm. Of course. They're asking who designed it. I smiled sadly. No one. What? It wasn't designed. It evolved. What does that mean? It means 30 years of operators, mechanics, instrument technicians, and engineers kept making it better. You can't replace that with one PowerPoint presentation. Jake laughed. I wish Mark could hear you. He probably will. Wednesday morning, the financial news became much worse. One of Redwood's biggest customers suspended shipments until production resumed. Another supplier demanded compensation for delayed deliveries. Industry reporters estimated the shutdown had already cost several $1,000,000. The number kept climbing, faster than anyone expected. Then, at 9:42 that morning, someone knocked on my front door. I wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened it, Emily was standing there. She looked exhausted, still wearing yesterday's flame-resistant coveralls. Her safety glasses hung from one pocket. She held a thick blue binder against her chest. I know this is inappropriate. Her voice cracked. But I didn't know where else to go. I looked at the binder. What is that? She handed it to me. Across the front, someone had written in black marker years earlier, Reactor 3. Field notes. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was mine. Emily looked at me with tired eyes. We found this locked in your old filing cabinet. She hesitated. And after reading the first 10 pages, everyone in the control room stopped talking. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was mine. Emily looked at me with tired eyes. We found this locked in your old filing cabinet. She hesitated. And after reading the first 10 pages, everyone in the control room stopped talking. I didn't invite inside right away. I just stared at the blue binder in her hands. It wasn't supposed to exist. 6 years earlier, I'd started writing those notes after realizing something uncomfortable. The official engineering manuals described the plant, but they didn't explain how the plant actually behaved. There's a difference, a huge one. Machines don't always follow textbooks. They follow physics. And physics has a nasty habit of surprising you. Finally, I stepped aside. Come in. Emily looked exhausted. Her blonde hair was pulled into a loose ponytail that had clearly survived 2 sleepless nights. There were dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't come because she wanted help. She'd come because she'd run out of ideas. She placed the binder carefully on my kitchen table. I didn't know this existed. Neither did anyone else. I smiled. That's because nobody ever asked. She opened it. The first page wasn't technical at all. It read, if you're reading this because something went wrong, don't panic. The machine isn't trying to beat you. It's trying to tell you something. Emily looked up. You wrote that? I did. She smiled for the first time in days. It doesn't sound like an engineering manual. It wasn't supposed to. She began turning pages. Every page contained handwritten notes, valve numbers, pressure trends, weather conditions, operator comments, coffee stains, grease marks, tiny sketches. Nothing looked organized until you actually read it. Then a pattern emerged. Every unusual behavior had a reason. Every solution had an explanation. Every explanation connected to another observation made years earlier. Emily stopped at one page. April 2019. She frowned. You dictated exactly what's happening now. I nodded. I suspected it would happen eventually. Then why didn't anyone fix it? I tried. I walked into my home office. Opened an old filing cabinet, pulled out a faded folder. Inside were dozens of printed emails. I handed the stack to her. She started reading. Subject lines filled the pages. Recommendation, Reactor 3, documentation update, knowledge transfer proposal, control logic review, risk assessment, turnaround documentation. Every email had been sent to management. Every one. She flipped through them quickly. They never replied. A few did. What did they say? I laughed. My favorite was, I found one page. Read it aloud. Documentation project postponed due to budget priorities. Another. Current system appears stable. No immediate action required. Another. We'll revisit this next fiscal year. Emily closed her eyes. Oh my God. What? They're still saying the same things. I wasn't surprised. Companies change logos, executives, strategies, but somehow the excuses always survive. Emily looked at me carefully. Daniel, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Did you know this would happen after they fired you? That question deserved an honest answer. No. You didn't? I knew something eventually would. But not this. She looked confused. I don't understand. I leaned back in my chair. Imagine your grandmother cooks an amazing family recipe. Okay, now imagine she never writes it down. You watch her for years. You think you've learned it. Then one day she's gone. You still know the ingredients. But somehow, it never tastes the same. Emily nodded slowly. That's this plant. Around noon. My phone rang again. Unknown number, I answered. This is Daniel. Mr. Carter? A woman's voice. Professional. Confident. This is Karen Wells from Redwood Chemical. I know who you are. She was corporate legal counsel. Interesting. Lawyers don't usually call unless something has become expensive. What can I do for you? We'd like to invite you back to the facility. As an employee? No. As a consultant. I smiled. Already? Silence. Then she said quietly, the situation is evolving. I glanced toward Emily. She immediately shook her head. She knew exactly what I was thinking. They're in trouble. I returned to the phone. I'm afraid I'll have to decline. Karen sounded surprised. May I ask why? Because no one has explained what I'd be consulting on. We're investigating an operational issue. I gathered that. We'd appreciate your expertise. I thought about it, then answered carefully. I'm not interested in assigning blame. Neither are we. I hope that's true. She promised someone from executive leadership would call later. We ended the conversation. Emily looked stunned. You turned them down? I postponed them. Why? Because they're still asking the wrong question. She frowned. What should they be asking? I looked at the binder. They're asking, how do we restart the plant? They should be asking, why didn't anyone know enough to restart it? That afternoon, financial analysts raised their estimate. The shutdown had now cost nearly $8 million. Production contracts, emergency repairs, missed shipments, penalty clauses, everything was adding up. Television commentators blamed old equipment. Industry bloggers blamed poor maintenance. Former executives blamed labor shortages. Nobody mentioned the real issue, knowledge, because knowledge doesn't appear on balance sheets. Just after 5 o'clock, Jake called. This time, he didn't even try to hide the panic in his voice. You need to hear this. Hear what? They found your emails. I smiled. I know. No, you don't understand. They found them in Mark's inbox. That caught my attention. What do you mean? He never opened them. Silence. He, what? There are 17 emails unread. I said nothing. Jake continued. The IT department checked. They're all still marked. Unread. I leaned back slowly for several seconds. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Jake whispered, you warned them. Over and over. I tried. They never even looked. No, they were too busy calculating what I cost. That evening, an emergency board meeting was called. I only knew because Jake kept texting updates. The CEO had flown back early from New York. The consulting firm's senior partner had been summoned. Every department head was in the room. According to Jake, people weren't arguing about the reactor anymore. They were arguing about something else. Responsibility. When companies lose millions, someone always has to own the mistake. At 8:30 p.m., my phone rang one last time. This time, I recognized the number immediately. Mark Ellison, the chief financial officer, the same man who had told me, your position has become financially unsustainable. I let the phone ring twice, then answered. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. Daniel, his voice sounded different, not confident, not polished, just tired. I owe you an apology. I looked out the window toward the setting sun. You don't owe me anything. Yes, he said quietly. I think I owe you about $12 million. I almost corrected him. The company hadn't lost $12 million. Not yet. According to the latest estimate, they were sitting at $9.4 million. But judging from the silence on the other end of the line, Mark knew something I didn't. Then he said the sentence that made my stomach tighten. It got worse. What happened? His answer came in barely above a whisper. Our largest customer just canceled their contract. When companies lose millions, someone always has to own the mistake. At 8:30 p.m., my phone rang one last time. This time, I recognized the number immediately. Mark Ellison, the chief financial officer, the same man who had told me, "Your position has become financially unsustainable." I let the phone ring twice, then answered. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. "Daniel," his voice sounded different, not confident, not polished, just tired. "I owe you an apology." I looked out the window toward the setting sun. You don't owe me anything. Yes, he said quietly. I think I owe you about $12 million. I almost corrected him. The company hadn't lost $12 million. Not yet. According to the latest estimate, they were sitting at $9.4 million. But judging from the silence on the other end of the line, Mark knew something I didn't. Then he said the sentence that made my stomach tighten. It got worse. What happened? His answer came in barely above a whisper. Our largest customer just canceled their contract. Worse. What happened? His answer came in barely above a whisper. Our largest customer just canceled their contract. Our largest just canceled their contract. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear voices in the background, phones ringing, people arguing, someone saying, "We need those numbers now." It sounded exactly like every crisis I'd ever worked through. Except this time, I wasn't part of it. Mark finally broke the silence. The board wants you back. As an employee? No. As an emergency consultant. I looked at the clock. It was almost 9 o'clock. The same executives who had spent weeks convincing themselves I was an unnecessary expense were now calling my personal cell phone after business hours. Funny how quickly priorities change. "I'm sorry, Mark. I can't." He sounded surprised. "Can't? I don't know what you're asking me to fix. The reactor. No, the company." Silence. "I don't understand. That's the problem. You think this is about reactor 3. It isn't. It's about 30 years of knowledge that nobody thought was worth documenting." He sighed. "I know." "No, you don't. If you understood, we wouldn't be having this conversation." For several seconds, the only sound was his breathing. Finally, he asked, "What would it take?" I answered honestly, "The truth." "The truth? I want everyone in that boardroom to admit why I was fired." Another long silence. Finally, "I'll call you back." The next morning, I wasn't expecting visitors anymore. Still, I didn't expect 3 black SUVs to stop in front of my house. My wife looked through the curtains. "Daniel, I think your old company is here." I smiled. They finally found the address. The first person out of the vehicle wasn't Mark. It wasn't HR. It wasn't legal. It was Robert Hayes, the chief executive officer. I'd met him exactly 3 times in 15 years. He wasn't the kind of executive who visited the plant often. Most employees only saw him during quarterly town halls or holiday videos. Today, he wasn't wearing an expensive suit jacket, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked like he hadn't slept. Behind him stood Mark, Karen from legal, and the senior partner from the consulting firm. Interesting. Very interesting. Robert stepped forward. "Daniel," I nodded. "Mr. Hayes." He extended his hand. "I owe you an apology." I shook it. "Come inside." 10 minutes later, everyone was sitting around my dining room table. My wife quietly placed coffee in front of each guest before disappearing into the living room. Nobody touched their cups. Robert spoke first. "I'll be direct. I appreciate that. We made a mistake." I waited. A very expensive mistake. Still, I said nothing. Then he surprised me. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was my personnel file. On top sat a single page. Reduction recommendation. Reason for elimination. Highest technical salary within engineering division. Nothing else. No performance concerns. No restructuring analysis. No succession plan. No knowledge transfer assessment. Just salary. Robert looked embarrassed. I didn't see this until yesterday. I turned another page. It contained a spreadsheet, columns, percentages, projected savings. My position appeared as a single line. Annual savings, $310,428. No mention of experience, no mention of responsibility, no mention of 32 years, just a number. I looked up. So, you don't owe me one. I do. I recommended eliminating your position. I know. I was wrong. His voice cracked slightly. I evaluated your role the way we evaluate most companies. Headcount, salary, efficiency. He paused. I never measured institutional knowledge. I smiled. Most spreadsheets can't. Nathan reached into his briefcase. He removed my blue binder. I've read every page. I frowned. Already? I stayed up all night. He laughed softly. Half of it looked like another language. The other half, he shook his head, should have been the company's operating manual. Robert leaned forward. Daniel, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why didn't you ever tell anyone how important you were? I actually laughed. That question had followed me my entire career, because I wasn't. Everyone looked confused. The knowledge wasn't mine. I pointed toward the binder. See all those names? They looked closer. Every few pages, different handwriting appeared. Mike, Jake, Sandra, Luis, Emily, operators, electricians, instrument technicians, shift supervisors, mechanics, hundreds of observations collected over decades. I didn't build that system. We did. I just happened to write it down. Nobody spoke. Finally, Nathan whispered, I've never seen anything like this. I nodded. You probably won't again. Karen from legal opened another folder. We've prepared a consulting agreement. She slid it toward me. 3 days. Unlimited authority over technical recovery. Daily consulting rate, $15,000 per day. I looked at it, closed the folder, pushed it back. I'm not interested. Everyone froze. Robert blinked. Excuse me? I don't want $15,000. Mark frowned. What do you want? I looked directly at him. Emily. He looked confused. What about her? Promote her. Silence. Jake. The maintenance team. The operators. The electricians. Everyone who spent years trying to keep that place running while executives only looked at quarterly reports. Robert slowly nodded. You want promotions? I want respect. Mark rubbed his forehead like, you have my word. I shook my head. No. Your word isn't enough anymore. I looked at Robert. Theirs is. The CEO understood immediately. He stood up, walked to the window, looked outside for almost a minute, then turned around. You have it. Every person you recommend will be reviewed personally by me. They'll receive the recognition they earned. I believed him. Not because he was CEO, because for the first time, he sounded less like an executive and more like a leader. I finally opened the consulting agreement again, picked up the pen, signed. Nathan let out the longest breath of the morning. When can you come? I looked at my watch. Right now. 45 minutes later, my old pickup rolled through the refinery gates. Employees stopped what they were doing. Word spread faster than any company email. Daniel's back. Not as an employee, not as a manager, not as a hero, just someone trying to keep good people from paying for a bad decision. As I stepped into the control room, every conversation stopped. The giant display wall was filled with alarms, trend charts, pressure curves, failed startup attempts. Emily stood beside the main console. She looked exhausted, but when she saw me, she smiled. I knew you'd come. I looked, that's where you're losing $12 million. No one in the control room moved. 23 people stared at the trend I had pointed to. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing red alarm, no giant pressure spike, just a tiny ripple. Less than 1%. Nathan, the consultant, looked at me. That's it? I nodded. That's it. It doesn't look serious. That's exactly why everyone missed it. I walked closer to the display wall. Zoom in. Emily enlarged the trend. The small ripple became a repeating wave every 38 seconds, perfectly consistent. I smiled. There's your problem. Nathan frowned. I still don't understand. You won't. Not until you stop looking at the computer. I turned toward the operators. Joe? A gray-haired operator looked up. You've been here how long? 28 years. When did you first notice this vibration? He answered immediately. Last Thursday. Nathan looked confused. The maintenance report doesn't mention vibration. Joe shrugged, because the sensors couldn't feel it. I could. I looked back at Nathan. That's manufacturing. Machines talk, but they don't always use numbers. I opened the blue binder, page 147, coffee stain across the top, handwritten note, winter turnaround, 2019. Tiny oscillation every 38 seconds after startup. Cause, valve response delayed by less than half a second because replacement actuator was slightly heavier. Solution, delay pressure stabilization sequence by 0.4 seconds. I handed Nathan the binder. He read the page twice, then looked back at the trend. My God, it really is the same problem. It always was. Emily quickly pulled up the control logic. There, she pointed. The timing value. It reset during the software restoration. Because the backup image they restored was 6 years old. Every adjustment made after that had vanished. Not because someone deleted them, because nobody had preserved them. Nathan whispered, so the reactor wasn't failing? No. The software wasn't broken? No. The equipment wasn't worn out? No. I folded my arms. The company forgot everything it had learned. The room became silent. Again, the correction itself took less than 5 minutes. Emily entered the revised timing. The operators verified each step. Nobody rushed. The room became silent. Again, the correction itself took less than 5 minutes. Emily entered the revised timing. The operators verified each step. Nobody rushed. Nobody guessed. Manufacturing punishes people who guess. Joe looked at me. Ready? I nodded. Start it. The room became strangely quiet. The familiar hum of pumps filled the building. Pressure climbed. Temperature increased. Flow stabilized. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. The wave disappeared. The pressure line became perfectly smooth. For the first time in nearly a week, nobody touched the emergency shutdown button. Someone behind me whispered, "It's holding." Joe smiled. "She's back." Applause erupted throughout the control room. Not loud, not dramatic, just the exhausted applause of people who had spent 6 straight days wondering if they were watching their careers collapse. 3 hours later, the first product rolled off the line. By evening, Unit 2 restarted safely. The next morning, the company's largest remaining customers resumed shipments. The financial bleeding finally stopped. Total estimated loss, just under $12 million. That afternoon, the board of directors gathered in the executive conference room. This time, I wasn't there because something was broken. I was there because something had to change. Robert Hayes stood at the front of the room. I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing every decision that led to this crisis. He paused. We didn't fail because of old equipment. We didn't fail because of bad employees. We failed because we confused experience with expense. Nobody spoke, not even Mark. Robert continued, we measured salaries. We measured efficiency. We measured quarterly savings. But we never measured knowledge. He looked directly at the board. And that's the most expensive mistake this company has ever made. Then he turned toward me. Daniel, I owe you something. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Robert pulled a document from a folder. We'd like you to return. I smiled. I figured. He continued. Vice President of Operational Excellence. Several board members nodded. Your compensation package. I raised my hand. He stopped talking. I'm honored. But no. The room looked stunned. Even Emily glanced at me in surprise. Robert frowned. You don't want the position? I don't. Why? I looked around the room, at the executives, at the engineers, at the operators standing quietly along the back wall. Then I answered, because this company doesn't need another vice president. It needs more people who listen before they make decisions. Nobody said a word. I continued. I've spent 32 years crawling under machines. I've watched mechanics solve problems that engineers couldn't. I've watched operators hear failures before computers detected them. I've watched electricians prevent disasters nobody ever knew about. They're the reason this place survived. Not me. I looked at Emily. Give young engineers mentors. Give experienced employees time to teach. Reward documentation. Reward questions. And never, I paused, ever believe that experience is too expensive. Robert slowly folded the offer letter. What would you accept? I smiled. 3 months. As a consultant, I'll help build a knowledge transfer program. After that, I'm retiring. The room stayed quiet. Then Robert nodded. You have my word. 3 months turned into exactly 91 days. During that time, every undocumented procedure was rewritten. Every senior technician was paired with a younger employee. Thousands of pages of tribal knowledge became official operating manuals. For the first time in company history, operators helped write engineering standards. Maintenance supervisors trained executives on the factory floor. Quarterly meetings no longer began with financial reports. They began with safety, training, and lessons learned. Emily became the youngest operations engineering manager the company had ever promoted. Jake accepted the position of maintenance superintendent. Joe finally received the recognition he deserved for decades. Even Nathan, the consultant who had recommended eliminating my job, returned 6 months later, not to sell another cost-cutting plan, to apologize personally to every maintenance crew he had underestimated. He later admitted something that made me smile. I spent my career learning how to reduce costs. You taught me how to recognize value. As for Mark, he resigned as chief financial officer before the end of the year, not because the board forced him to, because he stood during the annual shareholder meeting and accepted responsibility. He ended his speech with words I never expected to hear. The most expensive employee in our company was actually the least expensive person to keep. A few weeks before my retirement, Emily stopped by my office. She placed the old blue binder on my desk. The cover was still worn. The coffee stain was still there. But now, it had a new label beneath the title. Volume 1. I looked at her. Volume 1? She smiled. We're already writing Volume 2. I opened the binder. The handwriting was different now. Joe had added notes. Jake had added diagrams. Young engineers had filled pages with observations. The knowledge no longer belonged to one person. It belonged to the company, exactly as it should. Today, people still ask if I regret being fired. Honestly, no. Because getting fired didn't expose a weakness in me. It exposed one in the company. Losing $12 million wasn't caused by one bad decision made in one meeting. It was the result of years of believing that wisdom could be replaced as easily as a spreadsheet. Here's what 32 years in manufacturing taught me. Machines can always be repaired. Buildings can always be rebuilt. Money can eventually be earned back. But the moment a company stops respecting the people who quietly carry its knowledge, it begins losing something far more valuable than profit. Experience doesn't appear on a balance sheet, but when it's gone, everyone learns its price, easily as a spreadsheet. Here's what 32 years in manufacturing taught me. Machines can always be repaired. Buildings can always be rebuilt. Money can eventually be earned back. But the moment a company stops respecting the people who quietly carry its knowledge, it begins losing something far more valuable than profit. Experience doesn't appear on a balance sheet, but when it's gone, everyone learns its price. Everyone learns its price.